Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. This week, hip-hop started in New York and took root in places like West Virginia.
We made a conscious effort to make music that dealt with self-esteem and state pride. We just felt like, that was something that wasn't here.
304 original.
Food deserts are places where it's hard to find nutritious food, like disenfranchised neighborhoods in East Knoxville.
3 non-healthy food options to every 1 healthy food option is typically considered, quote-unquote, food apartheid.
And the Reverend George Mills Dickerson of Tazewell, Virginia, was born in the years after slavery ended. He's remembered today through his poetry.
I think he was really way ahead of his time. He was not letting somebody else name us. He is naming himself.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. In 2023, communities all around the country celebrated the 50th anniversary of hip-hop, marking a summer day in 1973 when DJ Kool Herc used 2 turntables to extend a funky drum break. And over the past half-century, hip-hop has gone from a marginalized art form to a mainstream powerhouse. It developed in major metropolitan centers like New York, Los Angeles, and the Dirty South. But hip-hop has taken root in Appalachia, too, and it thrives in places like Charleston, West Virginia. Folkways reporter Vanessa Pena reports.
I'm in Eric Jordan's home studio in Morgantown, West Virginia. He's walking me through his process of making a beat.
And as you see, that's the signal right there. I'm capturing it, right?
The song All My Love in Vain by Sonny Boy Williamson II plays on his turntable. The turntable is connected to his computer, and it captures audio from the record. Eric takes a snippet of the song.
I heard a little something. I don't know if I can freak it, but we'll see.
He creates a drum beat and layers it underneath the music.
All right, got my drum, so now I feel comfortable enough to go play around with the chops.
Eric is also known by his stage name, Monsterlang. He's a familiar face in the West Virginia hip-hop scene.
Yeah, and that's basically it. Then, next 2 hours, I'm just messing around with that.
Hip-hop has been a big part of Eric's life, in part because of the influence of his father, Norman Jordan. Norman was a distinguished poet and artist.
One-Eyed Critics. It's got a subtitle, Black Writers Conference.
In the 60s and 70s, Norman was at the forefront of the Black arts movement in West Virginia and Ohio. He was part of this nationwide effort to foster pride in Black history, arts, and culture.
3:30 in the morning, with not a soul in sight, we sat 4 deep at a traffic light, talking about how dumb and brainwashed some of our brothers and sisters are, while we waited for a green light to tell us when to go.
The Black arts movement inspired a diverse body of poetry, theater, and visual arts, and in 1973, a new musical genre, hip-hop. This was the backdrop of Eric's childhood. As a kid, he and his siblings often performed alongside their father. These performances included dance, music, and Norman's poetry.
He didn't waste no time with me. I was his Congo player at 9. And, we performed at Berkeley College and Howard University. I was in all his productions. All me and my siblings and my mother were. We were a family unit.
Inspired by his father's passion for poetry and performing arts, Eric started breakdancing in high school. He got gigs at mall fashion shows and local restaurants. Eric says he and his peers were pushing boundaries.
And, at that time, people who were doing hip-hop, it wasn't trendy yet. This is, early 80s, so we stuck out like sore thumbs. You could see us coming a mile away.
After college, Eric fully immersed himself in the world of hip-hop, DJing, MCing, and making beats from Maryland to New York. In 1999, he returned home to West Virginia, where he started a record label with his brother. Their mission was to make hip-hop music for, by, and about West Virginians.
We made a conscious effort to make music that dealt with self-esteem and state pride. We just felt like, that was something that wasn't here.
304, original. Eric formed a hip-hop group called the 304 Recons under his label. They performed all around West Virginia, collaborating with artists in Huntington, Charleston, and Morgantown. But it wasn't easy getting started.
It was rocky at the beginning because there was really no music, no hip-hop scene here at all. So we had to create one.
By the early 2000s, hip-hop had gained traction in big cities like New York, Atlanta, and Chicago. But in West Virginia, it hadn't built momentum yet. The 304 Recons had to get creative.
When we first started doing shows, we did raves, we did biker bars.
The 304 Recons were performing a genre of music rooted in black culture to majority white audiences. And not everyone knew how to react.
A couple times I thought we were going to have to fight ourselves out of these places, but ended up winning over the crowd and winning over the differences in culture.
Through their efforts, Eric and his peers laid the groundwork for a new generation of hip-hop artists.
I see the signs all the time. Life gives you lines. Don't trip, it's fine, 'cause I got...
Isaac Fajia, commonly known by his stage name Shalem, is one artist who's at the forefront. Shalem is 27 and lives in Charleston. When he first started making hip-hop music in 2007, the 304 Recons were already well established. And with the internet, he could learn from successful hip-hop artists all around the world.
Right around the time I started writing my own stuff was when Soulja Boy was big. So that was an inspiration in and of itself because he was so young. And he was doing everything on his own. He was producing his own songs, and he was using the same software that I was. So it was like a clear vision of what it could be if you did it right.
As a student at Marshall University, Shalem started performing in public.
I did the talent show there, was my first time performing, and then that same week there was an open mic. From there I met this band called the Heavy Hitters. And they ended up inviting me to play as part of their set at pretty much every venue that they played at in the area.
In just a few decades, hip-hop artists in West Virginia have gone from sticking out like sore thumbs to being accepted and even celebrated by the mainstream. Last year, Eric and Shalem spoke at Marshall University on a panel about hip-hop's 50th anniversary. And now, Shalem is the face and voice of the West Virginia restaurant Tudor's Biscuit World.
Tudor's Biscuit World got the best wraps ever. They make them big enough so you won't be hungry after. Got bacon, egg, and cheese, or sausage if you please.
I got a call from their marketing manager who said, hey, we have this idea. We want to do a rap about the breakfast wraps, so we thought you would be a good idea to do that. It was exciting to have been the one chosen for something that's like, it's such a great departure from how they normally do things.
After Shalem got the deal with Tudor's to make the jingle, he called Eric to tell him the news.
He kind of like said, I just want to say, man, thank y'all for paving the way.
In January, Shalem released his third album titled Hope This Helps. He continues to impress his predecessors in the scene.
The new people like Shalem, who I think is amazing. I think he's the future of our state when it comes to hip-hop.
Later this year, Eric will release a memoir called Child of the Poet, Son of the Dreamer, along with a companion album, An Appalachian Hip-Hop Story. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Vanessa Pena in Charleston, West Virginia.
Across the country, poor and largely black neighborhoods were bulldozed and replaced with new highways and civic centers in the 20th century. That concept is known as urban renewal, and it tore communities apart. Now, one woman in Knoxville, Tennessee, is using food to try to heal generations of damage in a city neighborhood. Folkways reporter Wendy Welch has more.
Family Dollar right here. Fast food places, another rundown motel. We have a drive-through liquor store. Okay, there is.
Famika Elliott is driving me down Magnolia Avenue. It's the street dividing East Knoxville from West. The east side is a historic black neighborhood where Famika spent summers with her grandmother.
And so if we ride back down Magnolia Avenue, we see that there are 0 healthy food options compared to all of the other fast food options and drive-through liquor stores there.
Famika thinks about drive-thrus and other eating options a lot. She's a foodways entrepreneur who brings nutrition-dense foods to East Knoxville shoppers. And she says East Knoxville is experiencing food apartheid.
I often say that it's very likely for someone that stays in East Knoxville to either die by a drive-by or the drive-through.
Most people have heard the term food desert. It describes a place where food is hard to get without suggesting why access is difficult. Food apartheid is tied to systemic discrimination, and it happens most in politically disenfranchised neighborhoods.
3 non-healthy food options to every 1 healthy food option is typically considered, quote-unquote, food apartheid.
It's hard to say what upsets her more about the situation in East Knoxville, what Famika sees or what she doesn't see. As we drive, she points out the former boundaries of the now defunct black business district known as the Bottom.
The Bottom was perceived to be one of the richest places in Knoxville when it comes to black Knoxville entrepreneurs and business owners, and that was before urban renewal, gentrification, or what my community calls black removal.
Along with businesses, East Knoxville used to have a lot of farms and gardens. Kimberly Pettigrew, director of food systems for the Greater Knoxville United Way, has historic evidence. She found archival photographs and transcripts that point to that history.
And you learn things like how many grocery stores existed, how many restaurants existed. There was a seed store. We found a picture. So you don't have seed stores if people aren't growing food. People had chickens. People were farmers and sold that food to white people in the same location where I ran a farmer's market.
All that began disappearing in the 1970s, the period of black removal Famika mentioned earlier.
It's something that was taken away. It was taken away intentionally.
It was long gone by the time Famika was born into a military family based in Knoxville. After graduating university, she planned to launch a career in social work. But she wound up with a food business and a lifelong advocacy goal instead. She wanted her community to have fresh fruits and vegetables available.
The way that I see it, we should get back to our traditions and learn how to be self-sufficient and sustainable. I practice the art of Sankofa, which is an African proverb meaning going back and getting it, which is the methodology of going back and restoring our pathways and traditions that made us who we are. And so gardening, farming, we taught folks that prior to it becoming a whitewashed industry now.
Famika first provided nutritional advice to a few friends and family members, like her former housemate, Z. Davis.
I moved in with Mika, and that's where we started to really have the conversations about eating good foods.
Z experienced what she calls tomato envy when Famika began coming home with fresh produce she grew at her mother's house on a tiny second-story balcony.
Yeah, it was so funny because she was like, where do you get these tomatoes and peppers from? I'm like, oh, my mom's balcony. Yep. He's like, what are you doing out there? I'm like, oh, we just made a garden. How?
When Z moved out, she started her own garden. Famika gave her seeds and ideas, and soon Z had so many of her own tomatoes, she was sharing them with Famika.
She'll tell me, she's like, girl, I got so many tomato starts. I'm like, you go, like,
come get them.
Salsa, like, hello, yeah.
Famika and Z looked at ways to contain her garden in small spaces using recycled household detritus.
Toilet paper rolls, 2 liters,
milk jugs,
yeah. Boxes.
Z found in gardening not just healthy food she wanted to eat, but peace she hadn't experienced since launching her fast-paced career in finance.
Gardening is honestly a form of therapy in every way, shape, and form. It teaches you patience at the least. And sometimes, like in the world that we live in today with phones, everything is instant. learning patience and learning how to be present in the moment and just enjoy the fact that your seed sprouted and then you get to watch it turn into a flower.
Famika helped Z with another problem, too.
My first job, it was a very stressful job. I had gained a lot of weight. I wasn't healthy.
So Famika started making healthy meal plans for her friend.
When I first started meal prepping for her, prior to her learning on her own, it was like kind of like a uphill battle. Because it was like, what do you mean I got to portion this all? And what the hell is quinoa? And why am I eating it?
Why does it look like that?
Yeah, and why does it look like that?
Z expected to lose the weight. She hadn't expected to enjoy the experience.
What surprised me the most was how easy it could be while it could still taste good.
Encouraged by Z, Famika began selling meal kits at the local farmers market. But she wanted to reach more people in the East Knoxville community. She recalls reckoning with herself.
What you're doing now is not cutting it, like it's not enough.
There's a proverb that describes the next part of Famika's journey. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Famika found 3 other foodways activists and entrepreneurs also focused on restorative foodways. Together, they formed an organization called the Rooted East Knoxville Collective.
I started Rooted East because I saw a need to bring our Black community back into equilibrium.
Rooted East began winning regional awards. In 2023, Rooted East helped a historic Black church put 36 raised beds on its lawn. More than 100 beds are on the lawn of that same church in 2024, plus 30 gardens in the larger community.
So I also want to see people growing food in our program and in the community, but also coming together over food, breaking bread, learning about, what they've experienced in the city, in their homes, in their lives, in the Rooted East program, just bringing people back together.
Rooted East asks where gardens and businesses used to be in the area, seeking the wisdom of community elders along the way, and then attempts to put them back. Famika describes it as hard but rewarding work that should be done within the community for the community, a concept known as Ujima.
At some point, we do have to hold ourselves accountable and acknowledge, hey, we've strayed away from tradition and we need to practice Sankofa and practice, Ujima, to where we literally, it's a collective work and responsibility.
In East Knoxville, restorative justice grows organically from within the community. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Wendy Welch.
Those first 2 stories are part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in the region. You can find dozens more Folkways stories at our website, wvpublic.org. In the midst of the Civil War, West Virginia split from Virginia and joined the Union. But that split was not inevitable. Coming up, the complicated story of how West Virginia came to be. You're Inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, focusing on students' futures. Classes available at concord.edu/apply.
If you live in or around West Virginia, you've probably heard the story of how the state split off from Virginia. But if your history classes didn't get into it, maybe you've wondered what happened. The simple answer is the 2 states split during the Civil War, and West Virginia was formally admitted into the Union on June 20th, 1863. That day is now celebrated as West Virginia Day. But like most things, the deeper you dig, the more complicated it gets. Hal Gorby is a professor at West Virginia University, specializing in Appalachian and state history. Last year, I spoke with him about how the 2 Virginias split. Hal Gorby, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia to speak with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to join you, Mason.
What's the biggest misconception that people have about West Virginia statehood and how it originated?
I think there's a couple of common misconceptions, some of which have been replicated for generations through, I think, the way students have learned about the statehood period, particularly like in their West Virginia history or studies classes. The best way I would explain it is sort of this argument that the creation of West Virginia was inevitable, that from the beginning of Virginia's history, there were these stark cultural, economic, political differences and geographical differences of the mountains that, made this sort of process something that was going to happen. I think the other misconception has to deal with the role of slavery in Western Virginia. It's sometimes simplistically sort of made out that there was not much slavery here, which there were not the same number of slaves west of the mountains as there were in the east. But pretty much in most counties of the state, there were slaves. They were, human beings in bondage, so it does play a key role. And it plays a key role early in some of the early steps of the statehood process as well, and why certain areas of the state maybe are more supportive of the Union, while others might have been more supportive of secession.
Let's pick it up with the Civil War and that vote to secede that Virginia made. What happened, and do you mind picking up the story there?
Yeah, so when South Carolina seceded from the Union right after Lincoln's election, many of the southern states had secession conventions. Now, Virginia's is the longest. So statewide, delegates were chosen for a convention that was held in Richmond starting in January and lasted well through the firing on Fort Sumter. The delegates from across Virginia, and then there were a decent number from what's now West Virginia, met for a number of weeks and very much debated the merits of secession, really fearing the fact that if there is a civil war and Virginia secedes, the first state that's going to be invaded by the Union Army is going to be Virginia. So there was a little hesitancy to join with the Southern Confederacy. But the firing of Fort Sumter and then Lincoln's call for volunteers really changed things. The convention finally votes to secede from the Union. It's by a vote of 88 to 55 for secession. Of the 55 no votes for secession, 42 of them are delegates from what's now West Virginia. And so the convention votes on April 17th to secede, but in the era of the day, they want to give the ordinary people their chance to vote on what they think. So several weeks later, scheduled for May 23rd, 1861, the residents of Virginia will participate in a referendum. It is a vigorous vote. And about a week or so before that, there are a group of these Western delegates who go to meet in downtown Wheeling, Virginia. And really there, they just kind of discuss really these broad ideas of what needs to happen. There's kind of a divide about whether the focus should be on, pushing back against the secession vote or whether there should be a more broader push to try to create a new state. That idea of creating a new state really doesn't get traction because I think the theme of that convention in Wheeling is a little more of a moderate tone politically. And so they decide to go back to their home counties, try to encourage voters to vote to stay in the Union, to show loyalty to the United States. And when that vote happens across the state, it reveals some interesting trends. Virginia obviously votes to secede from the United States. And there are a number of counties in the western reaches of the state, from Hancock County to the north, all the way down to Wayne and Kanawha County in the Kanawha Valley, that vote to stay in the Union. Interestingly, though, if you look at a map of this, the vote county by county, there are 24 counties of what become West Virginia that vote to secede. That's about half. It's mainly sort of the deep southern, what's now the coalfield counties, the sort of central part of the state, and most of the counties that border from all the way Monroe County up to about Hampshire County bordering Virginia. They all vote to secede. Then there's a dividing line clearly around where the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad runs through the northwestern tier of the state, and where the heavier populated towns like Clarksburg, Fairmont, Wheeling, Parkersburg, there's a much stronger support for staying in the Union. But the divide is almost 50-50.
You start with that map, but then as military operations begin, the Union controls, differing territories, and I guess there's battles in some of these counties. And eventually, the state as conceived grows. Why don't you walk us through, what happens?
As soon as the secession referendum happens, the Union Army moves into Western Virginia. They move across at Parkersburg, at Wheeling. They secure basically most of that area that had voted to be loyal to the Union. And around the same time, those delegates that had met in Wheeling prior decide to meet again in Wheeling in late June. Now, with this sort of security of the Union Army present, there is really a discussion now about what the next step needs to be. The delegates basically come to the conclusion in this second Wheeling Convention that, yes, we want to first form a loyal government, loyal to the Union, that sort of reconstitutes the government of Virginia, that the government in Richmond has now left the United States, and that we want to show our support for the Lincoln government and for the Union effort. And among many of them, there is this sort of idea that, well, maybe it is time to just, as John Carlyle says, it's time to cut the knot now. Now that Virginia's seceded and we have a civil war and we have battles that are taking place, maybe it's finally time to make this move. They reconstitute a government. They choose representatives for a state Senate and House of Delegates. They choose representatives to fill the open seats in the House of Representatives in Washington. And as this process goes on, eventually there is sort of a push to say, yes, we're going to create a new state west of the mountain. This is still early in the war, so issues like emancipation aren't really sort of at top of mind on the list of issues. But this is to give them sort of now control over their own destiny, so to speak.
So to fast forward a little bit, eventually the process moves forward. Virginia has seceded, so the Union part of the state sort of moves forward with this Statehood Act in Congress. Anyone who's read about Lincoln or read a biography of Lincoln, there's usually a scene where he's thinking, in the days before he issues the Emancipation Proclamation. But one thing I learned from listening to your lecture was at the same time he was considering the Emancipation Proclamation, he was also considering a bill to create West Virginia statehood. Can you tell us about that and paint us maybe a picture a little bit of some of Lincoln's deliberations?
Yeah, he had been tacitly supporting this effort. He was very careful. Partly for him, it was viewed as part of a goal of maintaining the support of the border states. And he saw Western Virginia as probably the most important militarily. But by the time the bill that goes through Congress makes its way to his desk, he has some choices. He asks his cabinet to give him their opinion. And as like often with Lincoln's cabinet, if you've ever read about them, they often frustrated him. When they return, 3 of them support the statehood bill and 3 of them are opposed, leaving it to President Lincoln to make the ultimate decision. He actually waits to pretty much the last minute to make his decision on this. And he actually is debating this along with the Emancipation Proclamation, which he's actually more secure about. It's the statehood bill that constitutionally worries him as a precedent setter. And he does agree to it at the end of 1862. In a very short but very logically argued signing statement, he argues that West Virginia is an expedient to the goals of ending the Civil War militarily. It's part of this goal of keeping the border states in the Union and making it easier for the Union Army to launch its attacks into the South. And he also, to raise those conservative figures who may have had a concern about, well, isn't this setting a bad precedent? Isn't any other state going to try to do the same thing in peacetime? He argued that a precedent in times of war will not be a precedent in times of peace.
In some of the reading I've done, there's usually mention to this story of a postscript, which I believe is the state constitution rewrite in 1872. Do you mind just addressing that just briefly?
after the Civil War, it's a very divisive period because West Virginia is not under federal reconstruction because it was a loyal state during the Union. But as I mentioned earlier on, about half the counties had voted to secede and had actively sent large numbers of Confederate troops. So when the war's over, many of these folks come back thinking that they're going to just re-enter their normal lives, and many of them had been very much involved in state and local politics. And in a number of different initiatives, a test oath, limits on voter registration, other initiatives taken by the state legislature and the Arthur Borman administration, they really try to crack down on some of those efforts of ex-Confederates. And so by a few years later, they propose a compromise to basically say if we support allowing all African Americans to vote as the amendment to the U.S. Constitution, we will also in exchange basically allow all white men over the age of 21 to vote. So basically to say there will be no restrictions on voting by race or by association during the Civil War as a compromise. Well, unfortunately, all of those ex-Confederates now that can vote, they're voting mostly for the Democratic Party, of course. The statehood government is mainly now the Republican Party. And so in the 1870 elections, they win basically almost all the seats. They almost flip the entirety of state government. And one of the first things they try to do is to move to have a referendum on a new constitution, which passes very narrowly. And in 1872, they basically rewrite the Constitution, which the Constitution we have now, the core elements of it is that 1872 Constitution with, of course, amendments that have been added. So most of the elements of the way our state government operates is largely set by that 1872 Constitution, which gave local control at the county level, kind of mirroring how it had existed under the Virginia government prior to the Civil War. Some of the issues about land ownership and the whole transfer of land ownership that's going to happen in the late 19th century with industrialization. Some of that is also put into that Constitution as well. But that Constitution does not discriminate against African Americans. So again, showing how different West Virginia is as a border state in the years during and after the Civil War.
Dr. Hal Gorby, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia and speaking with us today.
It was wonderful. It was a great conversation.
Hal Gorby is a history professor at West Virginia University. His lecture on West Virginia statehood was featured on C-SPAN's Lectures in History series. There's a link on our website, wvpublic.org. As the Mountain Valley Pipeline nears completion, there are still a lot of questions about its safety. Curtis Tate is West Virginia Public Broadcasting's environment and energy reporter, and he's been reporting on the pipeline lately. Last month, Kara Holsopple of the Allegheny Front spoke with him about the pipeline's status.
Last summer, the U.S. Supreme Court removed an obstacle to completing the long-delayed Mountain Valley Pipeline. The 303-mile-long pipeline, which starts in West Virginia, will transport natural gas from the region, including Pennsylvania, to southern Virginia. The company building the pipeline, Equitrans Midstream, announced earlier this year it's merging with Pittsburgh-based EQT, which is actually its original parent company. But the pipeline has had environmental problems. It's been fined by Virginia regulators for dozens of violations.
A lot of these violations stem from the lack of erosion control and sediment getting into the rivers and streams that the pipeline crosses.
Curtis Tate has been following the story for West Virginia Public Broadcasting. I asked him about the early May hydro test that the pipeline failed.
So what they do is they pump water into the pipe under pressure. It's called hydrostatic testing. It is supposed to demonstrate the pipeline's integrity and to expose any flaws that need to be fixed before the pipeline actually enters service. And what happened in Bent Mountain and Roanoke County, Virginia on May 1st is that a portion of the pipe actually burst under this water pressure, releasing an unknown volume of municipal water and also sediment into adjoining property. This was right at the entrance to the Blue Ridge Parkway. The Department of Environmental Quality didn't publicly say anything about this incident at first, nor did the pipeline builder. The only reason we knew about it at first is because one of the local landowners reported it to DEQ, and it went into their incident database. But we're not really sure how much ultimately we're going to know about why this section of pipe failed. The residents there said that particular pipe was installed in 2018, so it had been in place for roughly 6 years.
I know that you spoke with the head of the advocacy group Pipeline Safety Trust. What are their concerns about the pipeline?
Well, they are concerned about this hydrostatic test failure. That organization was, of course, founded on in the wake of a tragic pipeline failure in Washington State. They're concerned because this is, a pipeline that's going to be carrying as much as 2 billion cubic feet of gas a day under high pressure over some very rugged and remote terrain. Many advocacy groups had urged FERC to deny MVP the permit to begin operations. The Pipeline Safety Trust didn't do that, but it did say that the federal regulators, including FERC and PHMSA, should take a very close look at what happened there at Bent Mountain and just make absolutely sure that this pipeline's integrity is not compromised.
What are the next steps? When is the pipeline scheduled to go online?
Right. Well, it's actually supposed to be in service right now, or at least that's what the company said would happen, that they expected a late May startup. But they last week reported that they still had to finish a certain number of welds, maybe 10 out of, 51,000, something like that, and had to complete the testing. But they said that the testing, again, that water pressure testing was 99% complete across 303 miles. And so they were asking for a roughly early June in-service declaration or approval.
Read more of Curtis's stories about the Mountain Valley Pipeline on our website, wvpublic.org. Ohio Poet Laureate Carrie Gunter Seymour often writes about disenfranchisement, racism, poverty, and addiction. Her new collection of poems is titled Dirt Songs. In it, she recalls her small-town upbringing in the 70s and 80s. But the original owners of the land she now lives on are also never far from her mind. Producer Bill Lynch spoke with Gunter Seymour about her new book and what she sees as good in Appalachia.
The new book, Dirt Songs, there is on in the beginning, actually. It's not a dedication so much as, I guess, an inscription, which is to all the invisible girls. Tell me what that means to you.
So this book is it's different for me, but it's not different for me. But my very first book, Placed So Deep Inside America, It Can't Be Seen, was really writing about my ancestors. And then my second book, I think, really kind of pulled away from that. I'm still writing about my people and the land, but I definitely took on the challenge of activism in that book. I wrote about racism. I wrote about addiction. I wrote about, land abuse. And this book, Dirt Songs, is really a tribute to my youth and then moving forward in time and what it's like to be a girl growing up in rural America during the 60s and 70s and how we felt so left behind. It was a time when there was so much change going on in the country. And in small town USA, we were all just trying to keep our heads above the water, trying to understand, my God, what is happening, because our lives were, I don't want to say simpler because they were very hard, but community was so different for us. Children were leaving their families and finding jobs at different places around the country and around the world. But a lot of times in rural America, that wasn't happening because of opportunity. Things like scholarships. And very few young people had the kind of cash. Their families didn't have the kind of cash it took to send people to college. You had a lot of high school educated, extremely intelligent young people who got stuck. And so I like to think this is how this book starts out anyway, is what it's like to come from small town America at a time when there really was so little opportunity. And so for myself, just being given that opportunity of having somehow managed to stumble upon the means to get an education was completely life-changing for me. I mean, I can't even express that enough. And so this book starts when I'm a really ornery young person, and some of the poems are about me, some are about some of the girls I knew, kind of moves into my young adult life and my married life, and then on into how we transform. And some of that was through my obtaining an education and seeing the world a little differently. And then there is a bit of activism. I'll always speak a little bit about addiction because that's so near and dear to my heart. And also in this one, I talk about, colonization.
Would you read something for us?
Oh, I'd love to. I am thinking, so Bill, I'm gonna let you pick. Which one do you think you would rather hear? Put you on the spot.
Right. Yeah, Child of the Large-Beaked Bird, definitely.
Okay. I know, I love this one. I couldn't even believe it came to me. But I was feeling so badly about what was happening to our native folk and how, especially in Appalachia, they're just completely written out of the history. And I kept thinking about how strongly I feel about the land I live on and how much I love it, and it's not even mine. And it makes me cry when I think about how it must feel for them. I'm sorry, I get emotional. I better just read the poem. Child of the Large-Beaked Bird. The crows are up to no good, tapping the tin roof like it's Miss Glover's school for awkward girls. All juke, jig, and jaja. My granddog doesn't approve. Not the rooftop trapeze or the tomfoolery in the garden. Mischievous pecks gouged around the scarecrow's eyes. They're toying with me. I've tried to bribe them. Fresh fruit, cat food, sequins. Propped myself nearby, full lotus, trilling. Why subject myself and this prized pooch to the insufferable? The indigenous say their ancestors came to earth in the form of crow. I come to them, my sack of sorrows laid open. Perch on soil my ancestors stole. Sing dirt songs.
Your poems do touch on social issues that are very concerning: racism, poverty, addiction, a lot of negatives out there in the world. So, what's good in Appalachia right now? What can you see that's good?
I think there is. I think there are a lot of people out there working really hard to dispel the worst of the myths. I think there was some difficulty with J.D. Vance's book, who sort of characterized us all as one lump group of people who either pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, which we all know is a myth, or languish and they're lazy and they just don't care. And we know that is not true. And it was almost like that book helped us get up and get busy, because that is not true. How many of us know of people who are working 2 and 3 jobs, to try to feed their families? And I think the good thing is that people are starting to listen. We've completely transformed the word hillbilly into something very positive. People are really starting to appreciate the way we care for the land. And we saw a lot of that during COVID, didn't we? Everybody wanted to come to rural America. Everybody wanted to move to Appalachia because they thought, oh, this is good, clean space. And I just think it's almost hip to be Appalachian now. We've had people that have been so successful in their writing. And so word's getting out that really we've been working hard for a lot of years. I also know a lot of young people are going back to farming. They're going to schools for agriculture, which is so encouraging to me, because what are we going to do? What are we going to eat?
The book is Dirt Songs by Carrie Gunter Seymour. Carrie, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill. It was just so wonderful to see you again.
Poetry has been an enduring tradition in Jeanette Wilson's family. They've recited the poems of Wilson's grandfather and her Uncle George for nearly 100 years. Now, these poems about African American life in southwestern Virginia are read during the Juneteenth celebration in Tazewell, Virginia, where they reach a wider audience and connect the past to the present. Last year, Folkways reporter Connie Kitts brought us the story.
Jeanette Wilson thinks she was about 5 years old when she heard one of her grandfather's poems for the first time. Her Aunt Edna used to recite them to the children.
She would we'd be just up and cuddled in her bed, like story time or whatever.
Some of her grandfather's poems were matched with tunes to make them easier to memorize, like the Virginia Hills.
And it went, Virginia hills, Virginia fields, and the days of long ago. Oh, I wonder, I remember the folks I used to know. And
her grandfather was Reverend George Mills Dickerson. She called him Papa. He was born in 1871. He became an ordained minister, preached for more than 50 years, and married more than 1,000 couples at the Tazewell County Courthouse. He also taught in the segregated black schools, and he wrote poems, hundreds of them. He wrote about black children making the long trek to a school in Tip Top, about soldiers coming home from World War I with shell shock. There were family poems, Tazewell poems, and love poems, with themes of his Christian faith woven throughout. Jeanette's grandfather collected 106 of his poems and had them bound and published in 1949.
I'm so thankful that I got these books published because they would have been lost. And it's our history.
And he didn't have to just pass it down orally, because this man could write. He could definitely write.
Joseph Bundy is a poet, playwright, and community historian based in Roanoke. He says Dickerson's poems were a commentary on black life in Southwest Virginia in the first half of the 20th century, and they reveal his aspirations for his people.
In the fields of old Virginia and on Georgia's sunny plain, Africa's able sons. So he's going to say African reference, black African, Africa's able sons and daughters sing a hopeful, glad refrain.
These lines are from the poem Black Folks Coming.
Instead of saying Negroes coming or colored folks coming, he's saying black folk coming. I think he was really way ahead of his time. He was not letting somebody else name us. He is naming himself.
Reverend George Dickerson died in 1953, but the tradition of writing poetry carried on with his son, George Murray Dickerson, Jeanette's uncle.
Now, the Tazewell, Virginia Rescue Squad proudly presents George Dickerson.
His poems were humorous, but also topical.
We've got a president today. His name is Richard Nixon. From what I hear and read about, this country needs some fixing.
Uncle George recited his poems at high schools, community colleges, at local museums and festivals. He recorded them and printed them up.
He would be selling his little booklets and setting up his little tent and reciting poems at the Main Street Moments.
Jeanette says her grandfather and her uncle's poetry spanned momentous points in African American history.
Papa was right out of slavery, and Uncle George, his stuff started coming out really good after the Civil Rights Movement. So those 2 points in life,
After Uncle George died in 1999, she says the family continued to read his poems, and her grandfather's too, at reunions and church events, but the community as a whole began to lose touch with the poetry. That started to change in 2021. The town of Tazewell passed a Juneteenth resolution that called for honoring the contributions that African Americans had made to the town and the region. And now the Dickerson's poems are read aloud as part of the town's Juneteenth celebrations.
Everybody picking on me because I'm colored. They don't think I want to be free because I'm colored.
Betty Wallace read this poem by Uncle George at this year's Juneteenth.
They won't give me a decent job and claim that I just steal and rob. And they call me boy when my name is Bob, because I'm colored. I thought one time I'd try to pass, and then I looked in the looking glass. My hopes went down the drain real fast because I'm colored.
Betty is 72 and says this poem, written by Uncle George in 1973, has special meaning for her.
I can relate to it so much coming up as a kid, that the things that we couldn't do, not only because I'm colored, but because I'm a dark-skinned colored person. Well, most of my life, people would say, oh, you dark-skinned and you can't do this, or, I did not learn that black was beautiful until black became beautiful. The color of my skin was a very important part of me.
She says she's known Uncle George's poetry for years. Now he's getting a new audience as well. Brooke Ann Creasy is 18 and starting to write poetry herself. She says while George Dickerson's poems are sometimes funny, they're also eye-opening.
When you hear poems from other perspectives of historical times, segregation and stuff, it makes you understand what we don't understand. Because I'm a white person, I don't get to experience that, and I don't get to experience the discrimination like black people do. And that's why I think a lot of people show arrogance, because they don't like to learn about other people's perspectives, because that's important, is empathy.
As for Jeanette Wilson, she says empathy and equality were recurring themes in her grandfather and her uncle's poems.
They both had the same idea. The idea to just have equality for rich, poor, black, white, everybody has a part in this world.
Portraits of the two George Dickersons are now part of a town mural of 16 noteworthy local African Americans. These two men are standing, in the words of one of Uncle George's poems, tall and proud, right next to the Tazewell County Courthouse. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Connie Kitts in Tazewell, Virginia.
Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Ed Snodderly, Frank Hutchinson, Hazel Dickens, Johnny Stats, and Dinosaur Burbs. Bill Lynch is our producer. Xander Alloy is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. We had help this week from Folkways editors Nicole Musgrave and Jennifer Gorin. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe or stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, offering 31 bachelor-level degrees and 6 master-level degrees for students of any age. More information at concord.edu.